Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I have a video on stamping for you, specifically soap stamping. If you don't know, I have an Etsy store called Return to Sender Co. and on that store I sell custom stamps. One of them is an acrylic stamp, which you can use on soap or pottery or Play-Doh. I've had someone buy it for that use before. And I do get a lot of questions on specifically technique questions when it comes to soap stamping. There is a bit of technique and it does very much depend on your soap recipe. Some soaps can cure faster, some take a little bit longer, some are going to be harder, some are going to be softer, and then you have cold process soaps as well as melt and pour soaps. So I'm going to actually show you how I made a cold process soap batch and how I stamped it. I'm going to show you what it was like 24 hours after I made it, a week after I made it, all the way to 4 weeks after I made it. So I'm going to show you first week, second week, third week, and fourth week. And then I'm also going to show you how these stamps do on melt and pour soaps. So I'm going to show you cold process soaps as well as melt and pour soaps. So just a heads up, I am not a soap maker. I just make the stamps. However, I have made cold process soap in the past just to test out my stamps. I did that once before with a beer-based soap. And then for this video, I'm using a baby Bastille soap that is made up of coconut oil and olive oil. I actually got this made, kind of pre-made, like a little kit pre-made for me by somebody that I follow on Instagram. Her company name is Fresh Mayhem. I'll make sure to put her links in the description box. So she put together a little kit for me so that I wouldn't have to go out and buy the lye and all of the bulk ingredients just to make one batch. So huge thank you to her for helping me out with that. And the melt and pour soap, I actually bought a kit off of a website, I believe called Cup of Intention. I'll make sure to link that as well. If you're curious to see what this acrylic stamp looks like on soap in the wild, I have some examples here of some small businesses here in Ontario that have purchased this stamp from me, and they do a much better job at soap stamping as they are pros and I am not. So definitely check out these accounts for inspiration and to see some really beautiful soaps. Okay, so I'm going to start with the cold process soap. It's important to wear gloves because you're working with lye. And again, thank you to Fresh Mayhem for providing me with this little one batch kit. In one container, I have the soap mix, which is the coconut oil, the olive oil, what she calls her baby Bastille soap. It also has some coloring in it so that it's pink, and I believe this one was unscented. So I poured that into my bucket and then I poured the lye, which is what I'm doing right now. I didn't have a hand, like an immersion stick blender, so I actually just whisked this, stirred this with a whisk by hand for about 20 minutes. So it's a pretty good workout and probably not the best idea, but since I'm only doing this for one batch, it worked for what I needed it for. She also lent me this mold, so I'm using a wood mold with a silicone mold inside, and I'm pouring the whole container of soap in and just using my whisk at the top to create just a pattern because why not? So for this recipe, I was told that after 24 hours, I could demold it and cut it. So this is what it looked like 24 hours later. It's a much lighter pink and it is hard enough that I could take it out of the mold, and I just used a regular knife to cut it into, I think I had like 7 pieces. It was still soft enough that it was easy to cut, so it almost like melted in your fingers when you took it out, but it was hard enough that it stayed in shape, which is good. So this is my stamp that I sell in my Etsy shop. This is an example of a logo stamp that you can customize with your own text. It's an acrylic casted stamp that is, I think, about an 1/8 inch thick. So I don't put handles on these for this reason. When you're stamping, it's easy to use the palm of your hand or a mallet. So just place this on your stamp and push down. I'm pushing down really lightly because this is 24 hours later, so I'm expecting that the soap is still soft. So I'm using very, very light pressure, which is probably too light because you can see with my first imprint, it's not very deep. It's very much just on the surface. So you could go harder, but because this is 24 hours, it might smush it a little bit, which is what happened when I went a little bit deeper and actually used the mallet. For each test, I'm going to do one with my hand and one with the mallet. So for this second version where I use the mallet, which will always, in my case, give a deeper imprint, you can see how much farther it went down, and you can see the S and the A on the top are a little bit smushed, so the centers of those letters got caught inside of the stamp, and when you pulled the stamp off, those little pieces went with it. This is 1 week later, so it's definitely harder, but in my opinion, still not cured enough. But I also think this is kind of a personal preference. I'm just gonna let you watch this without a voiceover and you can see the difference each week. So now we're at 4 weeks later. I think that the stamping went really well for the 3-week point, and the 4-week point, it is definitely much harder. So I had to give a lot more pressure to do this by hand. It was definitely easier with the mallet. You can see when I did it by hand, I didn't get the best imprint. The left side is not as deep, but then when I use the mallet, I get a much cleaner imprint, and it's also quite a bit deeper, and I also didn't have to put so much elbow grease into it. Okay, so since we're doing an experiment, I thought I would also try melt and pour soap. I heard that this soap is not the best to stamp, so I wanted to see for myself, see why it wasn't. So I bought a kit from Cup of Intention, and I have a glycerin-based soap as well as a goat milk-based soap. So this one is clear, but I also have a white one. So I'm just demolding a few of them right now. These ones are the white, like goat milk based ones. And these ones are I believe it's glycerin based, so they are clear. And I also add coloring to these ones as well. So I noticed when stamping these soaps that it was really, really difficult. They are harder than the cold process soaps, so I had to add a lot of pressure, and it was just a little bit trickier. The clear soaps, the glycerin soaps, the imprint just doesn't show as well, and that's just because they are transparent. But the solid soaps that have the white base, the imprint shows up a lot better, so it's more legible. I also found that the white base soaps, even though they were still really, really hard and you had to put in a lot of effort, they stamped better. I didn't get as deep of an imprint as I did with the cold process, but you can see compared to the glycerin that it was just less messy. So not as great as cold process, but it can be done. Okay, so these are all the cold process soaps. I just kind of want to show you them one after the other. So that is the 24-hour version, and then we have the 1 week, and then following the 2, the 3, and the last, which was the 4th week. So I think that you could stamp at any point with this soap, honestly. And again, every soap recipe is completely different. But I did find that 24-hour and 1st week were just too soft. And then somewhere between like 2 and 4 weeks, I think would be the sweet spot. I prefer it when it's a little bit harder, but I think that would be a personal preference again. Also, there's a little trial and error about how you want the imprint to look, how you use the mallet, if that is what you want to use. This, I think for me, is too deep of an imprint because I don't want the letters to get smushed. And also when it's that deep, you can see the outline of the stamp. So I prefer how I did it this last week where it's there, but it's not super, super deep. But again, that's just like how I like it. And it's kind of a trial and error thing. You might want to experiment the way I did by stamping at different periods of time to see what works best for your stamps. And then also trying with the mallet and without, and then trying different pressures, just so you can see what stage in the process works best for you and which technique works best for you. So some final thoughts. I preferred stamping when my soap was fully cured, closer to the 3 week or 4 week mark, because there was less like smushing of the soap. When it's softer, if you have smaller letters in your stamp, there's a chance that, for example, the A, when I stamped that in the 24-hour period, or I think even in the 1st week period, the empty space of like the top of the A, this like empty triangle part, it kind of like falls away. So you don't really notice because it kind of, when you take the stamp out, it kind of gets stuck inside the stamp. So then it comes out and then you don't have that detail. However, when you're at the 4 week mark and you stamp down, there's no risk of that happening because it's not soft enough. The downside is it is harder to stamp, so you do have to use a little bit more muscle, or you can use the mallet. When it comes to the mallet versus your hand, it's totally a personal preference. You can use a wooden mallet or a rubber mallet. I tend to just like tap on the 4 corners just to make sure each section is in, and then once in the middle. And you want to make sure that you take a look at the clear stamp from above, because you'll be able to see where the soap has been contacted by the stamp and where it hasn't, so you can see before you take it off if there's a section that you just need to press a little harder on. I also find that the rubbing alcohol works nicely to keep the stamp clean, and it also does soften up the stamp a little bit, so that might be something you want to try if it is quite hard. You can also use things like mica powders. For example, you can just spray your stamp with rubbing alcohol and put a little bit on just where the letters are. This will help it stick, and then it will make the imprint and then go into your soap. So there's lots of cool YouTube videos on that. I will make sure to leave some other links to resources that I used to sell, that I used to send to people who had questions about soap stamping. and before I had this video, but I hope this video is helpful for anybody who's looking to purchase a stamp or who has purchased a stamp from me and are maybe having some difficulty stamping their soap. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I will definitely try my best to get them answered.